everyone. First of all, thank you for joining me in this talk. My name is Rosio Reyes, and I am tuning in from California. This is my first time giving a presentation at a conference, so I am very, very excited to be here. I am a junior software engineer at Anaconda, and I joined earlier this year. And I have been fortunate enough to be introduced to the Jupyter community with a little bit more depth, and also just being a part of the Jupyter community, interacting with various people that are contributing to a lot of truly like exciting lines of work. And so I want to start off by mentioning some of the motivation behind this talk, with sharing this talk with the PyData community. Um, and So it starts a little bit about where new Jupyter Notebook stands. You might find that the title is a little bit misleading because we'll be talking about a lot more than Jupyter Notebook, but it is sort of the premise from which it all stems, at least my work currently and where we are at. And so I want to talk about a little bit about what's happening, a glimpse of what's coming in the future, and also invite active users of Jupyter Notebook to give their feedback on some of these tools and contribute to Jupyter Notebook if you haven't, or Jupyter in general. I am coming from a place where I had limited knowledge of the Jupyter ecosystem and the inner workings of Jupyter Notebook, and even more so JupyterLab. And so I am becoming familiar currently, with JupyterLab and more areas of the Jupyter ecosystem. So with that in mind, I hope to stay true to the expectation that there's no previous knowledge that is required, as I share some of what some of the work that many Jupyter developers are working on. But apologies if that's not the case. I'm just going to dive into some of the changes in the ecosystem, specifically the changes that involve NbClassic, as it's the Jupyter subproject that us at Anaconda have been focusing on for the past few months. So here is a little bit of an overview of the agenda. Today, we're going to have a brief history of the Jupyter ecosystem and a look at Notebook, the Notebook application structure. And then we'll also have a brief look at Jupyter Server and JupyterLab and that connection with Notebook 7, and how that JupyterLab development has motivated development in Notebook. And after which point we will look at NbClassic, its development currently, and using NbClassic with JupyterLab. Okay. Oops. Go on to the next slide. Okay. So before diving in further, I thought, of course, it may be good to revisit some of the history of Jupyter Notebook, or Jupyter in general. So we're going to go back in time a bit. There are many pieces of work in the Jupyter ecosystem, and each have a lot of going on themselves, and there may be a good idea to have some common historical understanding of what has where we are coming from, and as we look into the changes that are to come. I know that was really helpful for me and just learning and sort of understanding the goals of the developers that are very active in the Jupyter community. As a brief overview of the history, before there was Project Jupyter, there was IPython, which was to me seems somewhat like a monorepo where a lot of different tools lived together. We had the interactive shell, the REPL protocol, and also the Notebook document format, as well as the Notebook document conversion tool, and of course the good old web-based Notebook authoring tool for just for example. Those are a few pieces of the ecosystem. So all of these tools, they were at different stages of development as well, and there was a need to be able to sort of separately move forward with some of them and make new releases as some were being developed, maybe at a different pace. So some of these pieces were also, in fact, not specifically tied to Python in any way. So there's the notebook document format, which will be same regardless of whether you're coding with Python or Julia or R. And so really keeping them together didn't particularly fit. So a few years back, when what happened was when what it was called the big split, I believe, took place, and the ecosystem eventually reached to the point to where it looks a lot more similar to what we, uh, or it looks a lot more like what we know now, and that's the separate packages that we are maybe familiar with. We have the NB format package for the notebook document format. NbConvert is the document conversion tool. And of course, Jupyter Notebook is the web-based authoring notebook authoring tool. Um, so yeah, so there are parts of the Jupyter stack as well that I want to briefly mention. I won't go into too much today, but it's worth bringing them up. There is the Jupyter client and the IPy the Jupyter client being sort of the API which we use to manage and communicate with Jupyter kernels, um, and as well IPy being the kernel side code that provides that IPython kernel to Jupyter. Um, there's also Jupyter Console, which is a terminal front end for kernels using the Jupyter protocol. And as well, there's Jupyter Core, which maintains some of the common functionality that many of the Jupyter projects use. And so this is kind of where we stand now. This image might be it's I think it's fairly uh, uh, recently updated. I'm not 100% sure, so I'll have to double check. But this is a lot going on in Jupyter, and so I just want to quickly outline those things. But we're going to be moving on right now, focusing a little bit more on the notebook. So for the notebook, just briefly, I want to talk about like the sub-project as we know it, which starts off like as a trailets application, and the trailets framework is what lets Python sort of Python classes have like some attributes with type checking, some dynamically calculated default values. And so really it is the sort of backbone of the configuration of Jupyter projects. Then if we look at maybe at the structure, of course we have our front end, our server, and then our kernels. If I look at today, maybe just for the purposes of what we'll be speaking about and the changes that are coming or that have been implemented in Notebook, we can boil it down to a front-end user interface and a server with our application package. And the front end is comprised of JavaScript, HTML, and CSS files that are sort of bundled together. Then the backend is a Tornado web server instance with various handlers and for different mechanisms. So of course, there's a lot more to unpack there, but in the interest of this presentation, we'll leave it at that. I do want to mention a little bit too about the extensions. So for notebook extensions, we typically have some maybe JavaScript and maybe some CSS bundled together, or either or. And the thing that we use is the package that we use is the Jupyter NB extensions configurator server extension, which is what provides sort of the configuration interface so that it lets us work with these extensions. There's also the unofficial like go-to package for installing a group of extensions, which is the Jupyter contrib NB extension package, which installs a collection of notebook extensions, and it's not officially a part of the Jupyter organization, but it's definitely like widely recognized within the community, so it does deserve a mention. So yeah, so for the notebook, we have here a front end and a server that we will focus on. So then I want to go on to looking at how another component of Jupyter is available to us here, because it's another piece of the puzzle that I didn't really mention in the big split, but it did come soon afterwards, and that is the standalone Jupyter Server package. It started as a fork of Jupyter Notebook repository a few years ago. And there's actually a Jupyter Enhancement Proposal that was submitted outlining the details of the goals for Server. And it's actually great to go back through that and see how that all has been implemented today. I definitely recommend that to people. That the JEPs are really insightful. So personally, I found them really great for learning about the ecosystem, and how it's grown and how it's changed and where it can go. So yeah, there were with the move split. So they forked this notebook, and they removed sort of what was meant to stay, or meant to stay in the notebook, and what was going to be a part of Server. Mostly what got left in Server was essentially handlers for different server management and services, and for handlers for like file management, for download bundling, for kernel specs and auth and such. Um, so another thing too that was really well outlined in the JEP for the standalone server is the extension app class, which allows server extensions to allows Jupyter Server to have server extensions. And with an extension, of course, we would be extending the server endpoints that are already available to us. We would extend them with our own custom handlers for other functionality. There's currently a server extension cookie cutter that is available, and it starts us off with a lot of the boilerplate code for the extension. As And so it's very much something that I would recommend if someone is looking to jump into creating some server extensions. I think currently there are some changes going on in server, and there might be gearing up for another major release. So it's something that actually I think they're having a meeting right now. So it'd be it's nice to jump in sometimes and learn about what's going on with server and what updates are coming. And I think this is plays some part in seeing how the ecosystem has changed, right? This split packaging, it allows for things to grow at their own pace, and as we can see, maybe there are a lot of cool changes coming in the next version of Jupyter Server. So yeah, let me go ahead and now look at JupyterLab. Somewhere around the same time that things were Jupyter Server was coming around, JupyterLab was also introduced into the Jupyter ecosystem, and it is a bit of an IDE like user interface. So it has a lot more of the modern JavaScript development stack. It uses TypeScript and React, and has been embraced by many in the community. It is implemented as a Jupyter Server extension and is all about like flexibility and extensibility. So it does have a core sort of application object, but it also includes a series of like package extensions that add to that functionality. So from the document editors to like the viewers, to document viewers, the menu system, all of that is a part of an extension. And so there's a lot of flexibility there, like what you want to modify, what you want to see in your JupyterLab. So yeah, another side note here too that I wanted to point out, but I forgot to add it as a bullet point, is that I've seen a lot of like accessibility work going on in JupyterLab, so that's been great to see. I of course wasn't around previously for a lot of the notebook development, so I'm not sure how all took place and how common it was, but it's been great to see that there are meetings, and I hope to join in on sometime on the accessibility meetings for JupyterLab. But let's go ahead and continue. Um, let's get to Notebook 7, which is currently, if you're using Jupyter Notebook, you'll see you're using Notebook 6, and so Notebook 7 is what is coming next. It's the next major version of Notebook. It was proposed with the Jupyter Enhancement Proposal number 79. So with JupyterLab being so welcomed by the community and used so extensively, it's great, but there's no denying that there are some people that may still be active users of Notebook, right? And there are many people who may prefer a simple or simpler interface, much like the one that they're already familiar with in previous versions of Notebook. And so this likely maybe plays some part in the considerations that led to the proposal here at number 79 to put forth the release of an updated Notebook 7 based on the more modern tech stack of and sort of architecture that JupyterLab is based on. So the JupyterLab components and this is all outlined in the JEP. And so some of the key ideas behind that I took away from that were that the upcoming Notebook 7 will use the JupyterLab components for the front end and the Jupyter server for the Python server. And so with that comes the automatic ability to use the extensions that you have available for JupyterLab as a part of Notebook 7. And with the small exception of a few that may not have the same components in the interface that Notebook 7 has, that is a much like better experience right away than maybe previously with Notebook, where there's no really standardized, or Notebook 6 I should say, and before, where there's no standardized way of obtaining extensions and just no one place to get them. And so with this incoming change, users installing Notebook will soon be receiving Notebook 7 when installed from our PyPy, or just doing a simple pip install will bring that over. And while this will soon hopefully be a welcome change with the updates that it brings, I think developers do recognize that there will likely be cases where users will find potential disruptions to their workflow because of the fact that it is a different Jupyter NbClassic was introduced, and NbClassic it is a here, right? So, well, from early on, when Jupyter Server was proposed, with the standalone Jupyter Server was proposed, there was still a mention of both a JupyterLab interface that is as an extension of Server, as well as a notebook that is an extension of Server, right? And it's indeed what's happening. Notebook 7 is set to be released. It's an extension of Notebook. Hopefully, Notebook 7 is out in the near future. But although this is happening, there's still the fact that a lot of the new extensions will not be working with the tech stack that Jupyter Notebook 7 will use. And so they will not be compatible, and people will be maybe left with having to make a choice of maybe I can't move to 7 yet, or what am I going to do to make sure that my extensions are usable in this new tech stack. And so whether these extensions are like popular extensions within the notebook ecosystem, Jupyter Notebook ecosystem, or internal extensions that are important to maybe a more specific group of people, or just a smaller group that uses this particular extension that has a lot of work behind it, many years of development, maybe. So that's kind of where our there's been a lot of time and effort spent into like trying to aid this transition to the more modern notebook. But well, like my migration guides are out and they have been available, but there are obstacles there, and one of them is simply the new tech stack. Of course, there's other things that can come up, and so there was and is more to do to help smooth that transition. And so to help that situation, maybe even just giving users more time to transition to the updated code base. And we have NbClassic, the NbClassic subproject, which extensions developed for Notebook 6 will be compatible with NbClassic, and also provide the benefit of offering through a means through which users can benefit from updates on other packages, like updates to Jupyter Server, while continuing to make use of the old UI that they sort of developed their extensions for. So let's go ahead. I'm gonna. So this is a few sort of big changes or notable changes that I wanted to bring up. I wanted to first go over, these are changes that have happened in NbClassic. So before I go into depth as to like what work has been going on into NbClassic, I first want to go over a small outline of the Jupyter Server extension. So the Jupyter Server provides a base class extension app. So that provides much of the boilerplate code required for a server extension, and we can overwrite properties and methods of that class to fit our needs. We can make use of other tools that are provided by Jupyter Server to add properties and work with the handlers that are available through Jupyter Server. The available one of the handlers that I'm thinking of is Jupyter, Jupyter handler, I believe it is, which has Jupyter specific settings. So we can more easily start working with extensions with the
Hello, Rosio. Just
yeah.
want to let you know that you have 5 minutes now to take question and answer. I would love if you have to take the question and
Okay.
answer.
Oh yes,
So
thank
if
you.
anyone has a question to ask,
Yeah, if there are questions, please feel free to share. I do want to share that one of the big changes that I wanted to get to and I didn't get the chance, I want to share before our 5 minutes are up, is that, as I mentioned, NbClassic is there sort of to allow extensions before Notebook 6 to work in your new environment where you have downloaded Notebook 7 and you're working with JupyterLab. So one of the big changes that happened with Notebook 6 is that it's now we have a before NbClassic Notebook 6 and a after NbClassic Notebook 6. Before NbClassic Notebook 6 is 6.4, Notebook 6.4, which has its static assets for the front end there, and it's still a Tornado server, uh, and also has the handlers. But then there's the after NbClassic Notebook, and it's 6.5, which now no longer carries the static assets. They're now provided by NbClassic, so those were pulled and all that history was moved over to NbClassic. And we have still the Tornado server and the handlers within the notebook repo. So I do want to throw out that in 6.5 and NbClassic themselves are meant to be maintained for the next few years following the release of Notebook 7, which will maybe happen in the upcoming few months. and after then, it's intended to just be end of life. So that's an important detail that I don't want to miss. Yeah. Um,
Okay, thank you very much. We have a question here
mhm.
by Francisco Lucantoni. He said, any plan to improve versionability of I4 MB files?
I'm sorry. Can you repeat that one more time? It's choppy.
Any plan to improve versionability of I4 MB files?
Oh, okay. I see it. Um, so I think that maybe some work that is happening in Notebook. Honestly, um, I would definitely take a look at the NB format sort of repository and any issues and conversations that are happening there. Currently, as I mentioned earlier, I'm fairly new to the Jupyter ecosystem, and so I'm definitely slowly starting off in NbClassic and now jumping over to look at Notebook 7 and also JupyterLab. So I'm not very familiar what may be going on with sort of how notebook files are versioned, but I would definitely suggest looking at some of the other repositories and seeing what conversations are happening in those issues.
Okay, thank you very much.
Hmm.
We really appreciate you speaking with us at PyData Global 2022.
Yeah.
So you
Thank
can
you.
move to
Thank you so much for having
the
me.
discussion to Discord.
Okay, thank you so
Okay.
much. I apologize for not tracking my time, but thank
No, no,
you.
no.
Mhm.
Thank you very much for your talk and for being part of PyData Global 2022. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.